Welcome everybody to our panel today. This panel is going to be focused on specifically the cannabis marketplace. Today, obviously, we know cannabis is becoming one of the most dominant verticals in the world. And we are here to really talk about how consumers are reacting to the marketplace, as well as really establishing the scale and opportunity for this vertical. And today, one in five of every American has access to CBD or is using CBD or cannabis, and we'll see that grow over these years to come. And I'll introduce myself. I'm Chad Bronstein. I'm the founder and CEO of Philo, which is a compliance enterprise cloud that focuses across the cannabis marketplace from data and compliance. And then I will let the other people introduce themselves.
Where do you want to start?
Steve. Go ahead.
I'm Steve Cattleman. I work at Omnicom. It's a large advertising holding company. I specifically work on global partnerships. And so my job is to make sure our brands, again, all over the world, have the latest and greatest technologies and access to doing the best and the brightest advertising. So I'm interested in this for obvious reasons. Like data-driven buying is exploded in the past few years and has been much more pronounced because of the shelter in place and the like. So it's my remit to make sure that I have the best data around the world. Good to be here.
Steve. And then Liz, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Liz Connors. I'm the Director of Analytics at Headset. We are a data and market intelligence company in the cannabis space, and we offer data and software tools for cannabis retailers, cannabis manufacturers, brands, producers, and investors to better understand their own data or the market itself. Today, for every dollar spent in cannabis, we see about 25 cents come through our databases. So we have a very large sample of consumer transactions, and that's where most of the insights I'll talk about today come from.
Awesome, thank you, Liz. And then Rick.
Hello, Southwest. My name is Rick Venturo. I'm the Associate Director of Client Services at Nielsen IQ, working specifically under their cannabis practice in North America. So if you don't know, Nielsen in general is just a media measurement and also a sales tracking organization that does a lot more than that. But specifically, I support relationships with Nielsen IQ's CPG and retail clients and a growing number of cannabis companies that we're also working with. I also provide, key commentary to industry groups and do a lot of speaking with the media. Overall, though, I would say that most of my work is really around supporting some of those cannabis-centric initiatives that Nielsen and our clients are really looking to execute these days. And that really details everything from just providing general business information, providing consultative analytics and insights, and also designing some of the research methodologies that we have for our syndicated products and some of those custom solutions. So really excited to be here. Obviously, cannabis holds a place very near and dear to my heart.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm looking forward to jumping into the panel and some good questions for each one of you guys. So obviously, we just discussed each one of your introductions of the opportunities in cannabis and how we're approaching them, each company. And I'm going to throw it over to Liz. Liz, can you, from the marketplace today, it'd be great to hear from Headset's perspective of what the actual scale and reach is in the marketplace, and where do you see it going over the next few years?
Yeah, for sure. I made a little note card with some notes for myself, so I had up-to-date statistics. So from our projections, we think that in 2020, adult use and medical sales in the US were anywhere between 18 and $19 billion. And we're projecting those to be up to about $23 billion next year. So still some super strong growth going on in the market. The thing that's exciting about that growth is really coming not just from new states coming online. I'm sure everybody saw the election. Among other exciting news, New Jersey, Arizona, Montana, South Dakota all legalized adult use cannabis, which is where we see a lot of growth come from. But in addition, we're still seeing really strong growth in states that have had adult use cannabis for years. So places like Colorado breached $2 billion very quickly this year for the first time. and they're still posting, year over year growth in the 20 to 30% range. So we definitely are seeing super strong growth even in markets that already exist as new products come to market, as new companies come in. And then the other really major market is Canada. So it is federally legal in Canada. Today, that's annualizing out at about $3 billion. So Canada had a relatively slow rollout. So we're still seeing a whole lot of growth there as well. So I think that these kind of like 20, 30% CAGRs that we're seeing in cannabis probably don't have any chance of waning anytime in the near future. At least, I gave a projection last year and I said, if the sun burns out or if there's like a pandemic or something. So I'm always very careful to caveat my projections now, but God willing and the creek don't rise.
Liz, I personally think that we're even over succeed those markets in terms of scale, just because, like you said, it's funny you said about pandemic, but the pandemic for being essential for us just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. And like you said, you're seeing markets like Michigan and Illinois, and these markets continue to grow even without having new markets come online. And it'd be really interesting to see what happens with New York and New Jersey when they go rec, because we'll see a huge growth there. So I think it's really great, from where we're all sitting, is to see the opportunities there. Yeah. And then just seeing how the market is dictating, in my opinion, how we're seeing more and more verticals that are already in CPG and other areas having to really take notice of this and figure out what they're going to do in it, because at this point you can't ignore it, right? So I think that's a big thing to call out.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff out there already. Like Pabst has a cannabis beverage in California that's quite tasty, and so we're not the only ones noticing the growth at this point. That's for sure.
Yeah, yep. And so, and Rick, we all are looking from, obviously with Nielsen being one of the biggest measurement companies in the world, what is it that you're seeing from your practice running analytics and measurement for cannabis? What does that consumer even look like at this day and age? Like, is it something, we always, Philo being a data company as well, we always, there's so many different correlations. Like, what would you say the attributes of a cannabis consumer looks like today?
Yeah, absolutely, Chad. And before I kind of talk just a little bit about what the general consumer looks like when we talk about cannabis, I also just want to point out, in addition to everything that Liz had mentioned, that in addition to those 18 to 19 billion that, Headset's tracking in the regulated space, there's also kind of this unregulated side of cannabis that, sometimes people overlook or is not necessarily getting as much attention relative to legal marijuana. But that's really the hemp CBD side, or the CBD derived hemp derived side of the market. So at Nielsen, we are tracking that side of the market, as well as working with Headset to understand those sales from the legal and regulated side of things. But in terms of the hemp CBD or the hemp derived side of things, we're looking at about 1.9 billion in terms of sales for 2020. So again, nowhere near that 18 to 19 billion, that Liz is calling for 2020, but still, it's a growing market, and definitely something that at least our conventional CPG clients and some of our more traditional retailers are certainly keeping an eye on as well. So that's about kind of the hemp side of things. In terms of what we see from cannabis consumers in general, I think broadly speaking, I always like to think about them in terms of kind of these broader buckets that really kind of tie back to the needs that people are trying to address, and really the underlying reasons why they're using cannabis in the first place. So when I think about those regulated marijuana products, products that we would refer to as kind of THC dominant products, there's really kind of 5 needs that consumers tend to center around. And that's really things like experience enhancement. So, people enjoy using cannabis when they're watching movies, listening to music, playing video games at home. There's another segment, when we talk about THC needs, that's more related just to holistic health. So things around, diminishing levels of anxiety, helping people relax, even getting a better night's sleep. And then certainly there's also folks that are really centered on the legal marijuana products, specifically for things like pain management and helping with other maladies that they may have. And then finally, there's another class of users that really use legal marijuana as a way to foster social connection. So I look at it very similarly to how you might invite a friend over to share a beer or have a glass of wine, or at least you used to be able to do that. That's how folks are kind of using some of these regulated marijuana products. From the more CBD-centric side of things, when I think about consumers, again, we see a lot of folks really coming to the category for that pain management side of things, but also, for things around mental health and helping to assuage anxiety is also prevalent in CBD. And we also see folks that are much more targeted in terms of what types of treatments that they're looking to get from these CBD type products, whether it's things around digestion, whether it's, a more rare condition or a different type of illness that they may have. There's definitely folks using it for targeted treatment as well. And then certainly there's just those folks that are also using it just for general health and wellness. It may not necessarily be tied to any one specific thing, but they take CBD and it just makes them feel better, like a more actualized version of themselves. So I'd say broadly speaking, that's how we at Nielsen at least kind of look at cannabis consumers. That being said, in terms of the regulated marijuana side of things, it's still an industry that's going to skew a little bit more male than female, but certainly, that can vary based on the formats that you're looking at. In terms of who that general consumer is for both the hemp CBD side of things and the regulated marijuana side of things, that general user really tends to be someone that's, in that millennial kind of generation group, or maybe a little bit younger. That being said, though, we have seen a tremendous amount of growth in that 55 plus age segment, really coming into both the regulated marijuana side as well as the hemp CBD side.
Yeah.
And
So to say, Rick, so what you're saying, I agree, from Philo's standpoint, so you guys are measurement, we're more so targeting those consumers, which is great because we play both sides, right? You're providing, how does the consumer, what are you seeing from the measurement side? And then we're actually targeting those consumers in a live environment for brands. And what we're seeing with actual big brands, right? We're seeing really high performance. And when you're going up against certain segmentation, like a standard Rick, the Frosted Flake buyer, versus Rick, the cannabis or CBD buyer, there's different attributes we both know and how you target them. And we're seeing really great performance from the marketplace because you mentioned a few things. I think that what we're all realizing that, and from Nielsen's perspective, I'd love to hear it, but what we're all realizing is that people before this all became large were like Rick the Stoner, and that's who cannabis user was, right? Or Liz the Stoner. And what we're starting to see is that people are starting to realize that's not the case, right? When you look at someone on paper, they may look like they're not smoking weed or eating edibles or buying sativa or CBD, right? So I think what we've learned, all of us learned, is that this is part of the active lifestyle. And you really want to figure out what part of that active lifestyle and the attributes that are going to be beneficial to provide back to the mainstream world too, because they need to learn this attribute that they don't really understand currently to date. And so I think that's something that's really important that for our listeners to understand, is like, that's what's been really educational for us, is that we've learned so much about these consumers that I think everyone jumping in had stigmas about.
And they move and change a lot too. Like this year, my demographic was one of the largest growth demographics. So that like 35 to 40-year-old woman, we're seeing a lot of growth in kind of that coveted soccer mom group that a lot of people like to go after. And so I think as things begin to normalize, like, I think we did have this idea of, Liz the Stoner before. And I think that that's kind of starting to fade away with some of the products, and some of the CBD stuff, I think really probably drove a lot of people into the market, is what you saw, right, Rick?
Yeah, absolutely. Those things are definitely bringing people in. But I also think just seeing representations of cannabis users being more tied to everyday people has also, really helped kind of dispel that sort of stoner myth. And I think that, brands are also doing a really good job bringing in brand ambassadors who help emphasize that it's not just, these counterculture figures that are really pushing the industry. It really is, like you said, Liz, a lot of these soccer moms and, stressed out dads, people that are homeschooling as well. So definitely doing a really good job of kind of normalizing cannabis use. But I also think just playing up a lot of those wellness aspects, also has done a lot to sort of normalize use. I think before, if we look way back when, earlier in the industry, a lot of folks were really kind of leaning heavily on some of that stonery imagery, or, I saw, at one point, a lot of bikini clad women in ads and stuff. And I think that was really kind of turning off a lot of the population to what some of the benefits of cannabis actually could be. So I think the industry is doing a really good job of kind of reinventing itself and really putting its best foot forward.
Yep. And it's all great points there. And then I'm going to throw it over our friend Steve over here. So Steve, legend in the advertising industry, running partnerships globally for Omnicom for quite some time. You've seen it all, right? Yep. I'm guessing you probably thought you may not have seen this day come where cannabis is becoming a very big topic at Omnicom. And you obviously representing some of the biggest brands in the world. What are the brands thinking about? How are they thinking about cannabis data? And what are they thinking about in terms of, their future in it?
Yeah, it's I'm going to reiterate exactly what Liz and Rick were saying. Like, the stigma around cannabis users and CBD users is gone in most states. What I think is interesting is this market is still going to grow quite a bit. You mentioned, Chad, New Jersey and New York, obviously very big markets in which to advertise. So to me, it's like a perfect storm of what happened, right? Like we can now get purchase data from what people are purchasing. It's no longer, hey, we think this is what this segment's going to do. We have actual purchase data. To me, and like Liz, you may disagree a little bit, I still view this insofar as advertising a fairly new segment, right? Like we have a big brand in every vertical you can imagine. So obviously from pharma to QSR, meaning quick service restaurants, you can see applications for why they would be interested, right? Rick, you mentioned, like just all the things you guys mentioned, like, hey, listen, movies, obviously we got movie brands, anxiety, pain relief, the social aspect, and what it's going to do to alcohol brands that people are maybe substituting booze for, whether it's THC or cannabis or CBD or whatever. So it just kind of runs the gamut. And what I find really interesting is as we start learning more and more and more about these people is what is that special insight between each one of those groups. You can't just go out and say stoner, whatever you guys are referring to, stoner, stoner mom or whatever. It's each one of those segments is going to have uniqueness about it. And it's not just about, how do we target that consumer? We can also think about, there's going to be things that segment of an audience, you can negative target. You can say these people are the ones that are most likely not to do something. So I just think there's so much there, and it's so big now, and it's growing. And like what's happening now, you Liz, you mentioned the pandemic. Like what's happening with the pandemic is so much buying moved to e-commerce. And when e-commerce happens, you can, and Rick, this is in your wheelhouse. When it moves to e-commerce, you can start measuring. So there's never been a day, like you said, I've been doing this forever. There's never been a better time for us to really find a segment and realize what they're doing, because even people that are going to buy fast food are doing it online, whether that's through Uber Eats or something. So my point is, and what I pushed Omnicom to do is, let's jump on this now, because we are in, like I said, the perfect storm in order to capitalize on this. And it's only going to grow, and more brands. Again, I'm sure you can look at your guys' roster of who's buying this stuff. It's brands you would have never thought were going to do it 5 years ago. So yeah, just want to stay on top of it.
Yeah, I would say that's a great point, Steve. And on the e-commerce side you just brought up, like and then Biz, back to the pandemic, that's been the best thing for us and sort of the industry, is that everything we can do now is trackable. We were just having this conversation, me and Steve. It's like, how does a big brand QSR or a big retailer be able to track return on ad spend, for say, or something of that sort for their brands? And the key answer to that is that most of the stuff is happening online now. And so I think that's a really important point that everyone's been bringing up, because that's really exciting. It's really exciting for brands. It's really exciting for the marketplace. And it's back to that cannabis correlation, is like, if the cannabis consumer today has to go online to order weed or CBD products on an e-commerce platform, then that starts the ecosystem, and that people are going to be also consumers of other products. It's that's I would say the right D2C consumer for you. That's just my take.
Yeah, cannabis was no exception to the move online. There are stores that are seeing 60-70% of their sales being ordered online. It doesn't necessarily mean delivery. Delivery still isn't allowable in a lot of states, but at least kind of that click to collect idea that we have is becoming super common, and is really transforming the way that cannabis brands operate in the industry. And the reason is, for anybody on the line that isn't a cannabis shopper, just so you know, traditionally, when you walked into these stores, there's a person called a bud tender. It's kind of like a sales staff person that, guides you, tells you what to buy, gives you information. this is weird. We don't have this in CPG. When I worked at HEB and did analysis, I didn't have this person like in the shopping aisle that when I went to grab Frosted Flakes, it was like, oh no, you want Cinnamon Toast Crunch, sweetheart. That doesn't exist, but that did in cannabis. And so this like first person that advocated your brand and that sold your brand was actually this bud tender, which is weird. And that relationship was always really difficult for brands to navigate. And today the brands that are especially growing really fast right now have really kind of taken this idea of we own our brand, we own our message. We're going to get that out to consumers ourselves. We're not going to be relying on this salesperson on the floor of the dispensaries. And it's making things look a lot more traditional. Like a lot of the branding we're starting to see, like Rick said, we're seeing a lot less of the like electric blue packaging with just like a crudely drawn marijuana leaf or like bikini clad women. And we're getting into products that look, you know, like you would expect to find it at any kind of retail establishment. They're branded, they're sleek, they're cool, they're interesting. They have great messages, great CSR. I mean, great, all of those things.
And really, I think, you know, you guys bring up a really great point that certainly this migration to e-com, both in the regulated marijuana space and even the hemp CBD space, certainly has empowered marketers and brands alike. But I think it's also really empowered consumers to have more intelligence about the products that they're going to buy and show them what different products, you know, are available to them if they can go outside of just that dispensary that's, you know, down the block where it's convenient. I know certainly looking at some of those click and collect platforms, you know, there's certainly information that's available about those products that either the bud tender is not going to know off the top of his head, or maybe he or she doesn't have enough time to really reiterate all that to you where it's very clear to you. Versus now, you know, I can sit in that online store for as long as I want and not feel rushed and really kind of make I would consider to be the optimal choice in terms of which products I want to choose for which needs, and really also keep an eye on, you know, supply and know when I'm going to need to get more product for replenishment.
Sure, good point.
So guys, I think, you know, what would be cool for the listeners to listen here is from what are your predictions, right? I'll go to you, Rick, here. What are your predictions on, we keep talking about like the mainstream world. It's funny because we all come from the mainstream world, but now we have endemic cannabis CBD and mainstream. What are your predictions? Do you think that the big CPGs, how long do you think they're out from starting to create CBD infused products, food products, beverage? We see, like we talked about Pabst Blue Ribbon, but I mean, that's one, right? There's many more. And so I think Constellation Brands obviously has a few products as well, but let's even move into more of the conservative brands, not the liquor and beverage brands. Rick, what do you think your prediction is for the conservative CPGers and outside of beverage and liquor? What do you think is going to happen over the next few years?
Yeah, you know, honestly, I think some of those companies that have a little bit more conservative nature about them, you know, certainly have been rightfully apprehensive about the whole category as a whole. But I really think that there are places where they can get in, especially if we talk about the non-intoxicating side of the industry, you know, specifically, you know, those hemp CBD products or other hemp-derived cannabinoids where you're not getting any of that intoxication. I think that's where some of those conservative companies may ultimately play, at least early on. I would say, honestly, though, I think the thing that's going to signal this big divergence where you're going to start to see a lot more of these CPG companies really start to get involved in much more heavily is when we get a better idea what federal legalization is going to look like, or if we're going to go that States Act route. I just think a lot of them are waiting for that federal assurance that there isn't any real issue for them getting into the category before they feel comfortable getting it. And likewise, I think you're also going to need to see from the hemp CBD side of things, the FDA or Congress make some sort of action that's going to have these traditional big box retailers, you know, feeling comfortable to stock hemp CBD products on the shelves. I mean, certainly some of them are doing it today, but the ones that are typically have a very small assortment on the shelves. And typically those products tend to be topical in nature where they're not, you know, inhalable. They're not really getting into the bloodstream. So again, I think that those two things are going to need to happen before we get a bulk of CPG companies really involved in the industry, and especially those more conservative ones. But I agree. I mean, we're getting very rapidly to that point where they're just not going to be able to sit on the sidelines anymore.
Yeah, so I'm gonna come from the feel angle now, as well as that. So we sit on a really interesting side of things, right? From the data side, trend, you know, and then from compliance automation, right? Our whole infrastructure comes from using our hyperlocal software for legal and regulation, and we're starting to really talk to the mainstream world about automating compliance to make these brands or publishers or even DSPs feel more comfortable on being able to actually take ownership and start allowing for cannabis advertising quite a bit more, right? Just speaking to those consumers. Because when we look at what's really interesting that we didn't bring up, and I think all of us talk about this, is that brands are wanting to target or understand the consumer, but they're not willing to raise their hand and build creative campaigns targeting that consumer and messaging to that consumer because they're still conservative. I think as we see more of what we're doing with compliance automation and other things, that we'll see brands starting to actually call out that they are wanting to not just target that consumer, but speak to that consumer with messaging. And I think that's going to be really interesting. And I think that's where the brands will start to take more, be more comfortability in the fact that I think it's more of a legal perspective now and a conservative perspective around regulation versus just even raising their hand saying they're wanting to play in cannabis. So just wanted to call that out. One thing back to Steve, right? Steve, you worked across every vertical to date, and let's call it social media, for example. Do you think that Facebook, Snapchat, Pinterest, all these different social platforms are going to start to be more open to letting brands in cannabis get on their platforms?
Obviously, these brands got big because they're smart and they're gonna follow the money, and there's going to be plenty of money in this. Yeah, and again, the adage of advertising is, the right message to the right person at the right time, and the messaging piece of it has always been make the ad relevant to who you're targeting. So yeah, I would be very, very surprised if in 2021 you weren't seeing a major name in almost every vertical targeting some sort of creative asset that is cannabis CBD related on social platforms. It's not a if, it's a when. And my hunch is that will open up fairly soon. Like I said, it's all because of the stigma is gone for the most part. And obviously, you asked, are these companies going to go after that market? A few years ago, you wouldn't be saying that, we're going to see, Beyond Burgers at a fast food chain. They're going to follow the consumer, and this is an obvious next step.
Awesome. Go ahead, Liz.
I think when we talk about, we really need to keep in mind how frustrating these companies are going to find cannabis when they get here, especially until the point of federal legalization. Today, you can't make your product in Washington and put it on a truck and send it to Indiana where you don't have a factory, right? We don't have any of that interstate commerce. There's very little synergies in this industry compared to traditional CPG. And I think aside from that, if you're thinking about making or selling products, the thing you have to remember is your products in one state might be adult use and recreational, but they have to be a medicine in another state. And that's really different, right? When you have a medical consumer, it's a different type of consumer, but it's a whole different set of rules and regulations around what you can do with data, how you can market your products. And whenever we do have federal legalization, which will be great, and all of us are so excited for it, we're just going to have this day of holy crap, the FDA is here, the interstate, we got to figure out all our taxes. I mean, this is a lot to figure out. And so even when that happens, it's really difficult to kind of, just because you can get a Beyond Burger a lot of places does not mean you're going to get these products a lot of places and have consistent messaging for, I think, quite some time. Even in Canada, right? When you look at what Quebec did, where it's entirely state run, it makes it so that brands have to have entirely different products in Quebec. Even the legal age is different in Quebec versus in Ontario. And I think that we could see some of those difficulties here, which don't necessarily usually exist in other CPG verticals. It's not to say it won't happen. I do think it will, but just cannabis brings all the scrappy people out of the regular industries because you got to be scrappy as hell here. And I think we coming into it with that mindset will make us a little less frustrated.
I would say, Liz, that's a great point. It is scrappy as hell in the cannabis marketplace. And I think let's call this out. When people come from agencies or come to from brands into the cannabis thing, everyone's a little shell shocked, right? They have the same.
I always just want to kiss them on the forehead and be like, "It'll be okay in a few weeks. You'll get it."
Yeah.
But there's so much opportunity there, right? That's being at the forefront and figuring it out is the rewards come to the ones that are going to go out and experiment with it.
You're preaching to the choir.
I get it. Yeah.
And so I would also say to that too, is like one thing that, which is a good problem to have, but a tough problem to have if you're a CMO at a cannabis brand, you're trying to build brand equity, is that a lot of the problems is they're always sold out of product, right?
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
And so even if they want to spend marketing spend, eventually they're like, we don't have product to sell, right? And that's becoming a big problem. But what we know is going to happen is that the market's going to get saturated. More and more people are going to launch, and so then these brands will have to transition into the world that Steve comes from, which is they're going to have to spend money like an Anheuser-Busch or Constellation Brands to continue to create brand equity. And that it's just an interesting thing to see how it's like that ebb and flow right now of how to speak to them, but not sell if you don't have product, right? So that's the situation that a lot of brands face.
But
Yeah, there's always big. Sorry, Steve.
I just want to stress, like, people hire advertising agencies because it's not easy. So the more regulations and confusing and all that kind of stuff is that's why I get so interested in it. It's why digital advertising works. So, I love the fact that you can do one thing in one state and a different thing in another state, so like that's where technology comes in, which makes me excited.
Yeah. It's cool from a product perspective too. Like you brought up how there's a lot of supply issues where products are out. That's true. But there are tons of products in this market. Like the average dispensary in Washington stocks about 5,000 SKUs, which for perspective is how much a Trader Joe's stocks. So these have very deep benches of products, and almost no products. It's still rare for products in Washington to be found in California or vice versa. Like we don't see a lot of that. So the sheer volume of brands and products out there, I think my company alone covers something like 400,000 different SKUs. And that's just in regulated adult use cannabis in not even every market.
And there's insights within every one of those within every one of those products.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think it's what you said, Steve, like it's not just this kind of one archetype of a consumer. There's like all these nuances to it, especially with all the data out there.
Yep.
Awesome. And then, from the perspective of, I would say the cannabis side, right? How do you think from, Headset's perspective, right? How does a brand how do these retailers really lean in from you guys? Like, because a Headset and Nielsen, but Headset mostly in this scenario would be, brands are using you guys, or retailers using you mostly to understand also how their own strains are performing in specific environments, et cetera. It'd be good for you to really, Liz, for you to explain how you guys are doing that and how you're working with retailers specifically.
Yeah. We work with both retailers and brands. We have different solutions for each. So for retailers, we have like full CRM systems for them to understand their consumers. So we do the consumer segmentation based on purchase behavior, based on things that they've bought before, based on, how often they come into store, how large they shop, like all that really traditional kind of CPG segmentation behavior. We build all of those tools for them to do all of that segmentation. And then there's a lot of companies out there that do, email campaigns, SMS campaigns, all the stuff that we're used to, right? And so we build all the segmentation that they need to kind of do if they want to do targeted marketing to achieve that. Yep. In addition to that, we have tools for retailers to understand things like what demographics are they best serving, what types of brands or products appeal to what types of consumers. We have that for brands as well. So for instance, I just wrote a big report on brands that more appeal to women, California brands that more appeal to women than to men. But there's, there are Gen Z brands, there are silent generation brands, there's even like archetypes of consumers, right? So people that maybe purchase quite often on the weekends versus people that purchase, early in the morning on weekdays, mostly like non-inhalables. These are two different types of consumer, not based on our age, race, or gender, but based on our purchase behavior. So we do kind of all those real traditional things with the data. I think we track something like 3 million customers. So it's a data scientist's dream to have that much to play with. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to play with, and it's really, it's interesting. Is like we partner with MRI Simmons too. That's now playing a big space in this, and then with Forrester as well. Like Forrester, what's really cool is we surveyed 161 brands, and we got pretty much majority rules in the sense that everyone wants to really take notice, and understand a lot of these data points that Headset, Nielsen, and Philo provide, which is great to see. So we got a couple minutes left. I want to really end it the panel with really each person giving a specific thing they're excited about for the next year, and what they think the market should take notice on over the next year or watch for over the next year. So Liz, why don't we start off with you?
Sure, yeah, I'm happy to. I think, gosh, I'm excited about so many things. I think the thing that I am probably most excited for is how many states are kind of opening up to having more adult use and sort of what that means for our industry. I think the more states we get and the more it's normalized, the more that kind of just, we get to that like Malcolm Gladwell tipping point, right? But I think as more and more states open up, that total addressable market gets larger and larger and starts to bring in more and more people to kind of push the industry forward. I think we've seen product innovation lately that's phenomenal. You know, we have, some states have fast acting edibles now. These are edibles that hit you in 5 minutes and have like a smoker's high. We're seeing, you know, microdosed beverages that taste amazing and are great beer substitutes with 0 calories and no hangover. We're seeing people innovate in like even vapor pens. And then this year flower, like all of a sudden came back as a cool thing because of COVID, right? And so I think that, you know, the more and more people that kind of come into the space, the more we kind of get these pockets of really interesting products and really interesting consumers. That to me are where like all of the cool innovation lies. Like these are why we do this job, right? All of the products and all of the people. And watching that happen, I just can't wait to see what all these extra states are going to do.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz. And Rick, how about yourself?
All right, don't call me a sadist here, but I think what I'm most excited to see in the next year is really what's going to happen, that we have kind of 3 different camps all converging in the same space. So certainly, you know, I'm sure people have seen the news. A lot of those Canadian LPs are making big plans for 2020, 2021 to really start entering the US market. And for ones that aren't aligned with, you know, some of these US MSOs, they're going to be duking out for placement, you know, in some of these retailers that, you know, Liz and Headset are tracking. But now also bring in the fact that some of these larger CPG companies, especially those guys who haven't made those investments yet, are probably also eyeing the space. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how the market is going to shape out when we have these 3 very large forces all kind of competing for that same space, and oftentimes a very similar or the same consumer.
Yeah, if you like a battle, it's going to be a good year, right? And if you like to fight, like unsheath your sword, man. It's getting interesting.
Yeah.
I love a good battle, guys. You guys are getting me excited just by the passion that we're talking over here. So I think that's why we all jumped into space, to be competitors and take on a trend early, and it's something that's really exciting. That's going to change, I think, the environment. So it's really cool. Steve, how about yourself? I know you're excited. Tell us why.
Yeah, mine isn't necessarily cannabis related because I sit across a bunch of different verticals, but I think emblematic of what we were talking about, I think advertising as a whole is going to get very, very interesting because mainstream brands are going to have to kind of unsheath their sword or whatever you guys said. Advertising is going to work better than it ever has because people realize that data-driven marketing is proven to be the most effective route, and that's kind of what I was trying to strive my whole career is proving its worth. And I think this will be a very, very interesting year for that.
And then I'm going to end it with why I'm excited too. I'm just excited, in my opinion too, is like over the past year, I've seen so many people jump into the space in a positive way. You see IAB taking a big stance on it. You see Omnicom agencies leaning in. You see Nielsen taking a big play, and you see all these different factors of showing where the market's headed. And it's just really exciting to see, you know, for all of us that are in this, like, you know, you're only in this kind of experience once in a lifetime, in my opinion, when you're early enough to say, you know, you've been in something like this with how it's going to shape the market. So I'm really excited about it. I'm excited to see that the market is excited about it, and there's just so much potential. And I agree with Steve on the mainstream world and where advertising is going. It's going to be really interesting. And I think it's going to allow people to actually have creativity back in their veins to do things that are fun. Right. So I'll end it at that. And I think that you guys, I appreciate everyone giving insights and joining this panel, and it's been fun, and looking forward to doing more.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.